I'm here in northeastern Pennsylvania in the Wyoming Valley at the Wyoming Battle Monument to tell you the story of how this beautiful spot on the Susquehanna River is connected to a painting 135 miles away in the New York Historical Society, and the way it's all related to one of the most brutal, heinous, violent acts of the American Revolutionary War. This is an incredible story. Are you ready? So there I was on a rainy, bad hair day at the Wyoming Massacre Monument here in Wyoming Valley, Pennsylvania. For those of you who don't know where that is the northeastern corner of Pennsylvania. The closest city is called Wilkes-Barre or Wilkes-Barre, depending on the pronunciation you like. And it's named for two great men, John Wilkes and Isaac Barre, who were supporters of the American colonies in the Parliament in the years leading up to the Revolutionary War. And I'll be doing a whole video on those two men and the founding of the town named for them. But for now, back to that monument. When I moved here, many of my New York Revolutionary War reenactor friends, historian friends, all told me, you have a great story there in the Battle of Wyoming and the Wyoming Massacre. So I headed out to the monument, and that battle took place July 3rd, 1778. And when I started reading about the battle and the parties that were involved in the battle, it brought to mind a painting I had seen numerous times in the New York Historical Society, and I always wondered who the person was in that painting. So let's travel from that monument 135 miles east to Central Park West and 77th Street, the New York Historical Society. In 2016, they had an exhibition going on called The Battle of Brooklyn. And this was the entrance to the Historical Society when that was running. And you look at this great entry they have here in these two statues. Do you recognize these two guys? This is Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr with their pistols pointed at each other at their duel in 1804. And the statues were life-size statues and placed at the proper distance apart for the duel. So that was a pretty impressive entrance to the museum at that time. After you paid to go in, you went through the Grand Exhibition Hall. And at that time, the Grand Exhibition Hall was filled with artifacts from colonial and founding period New York. And as you went through the Grand Exhibition Hall, you got to the end, and there were the double doors entry to the Battle of Brooklyn exhibit. So I went through here hundreds of times. I don't even know how many times I went through. I took lots of clients through that Battle of Brooklyn exhibit, and plus I'd used the library and other resources there many times. And as I went through, up on the wall, I saw this painting, Corn Planter. I always wondered who Corn Planter was. I mean, obviously he was a chief of some kind, and his portrait was painted by a serious portrait painter. But as time went by, I never really found out who he was. I would walk by and say, oh, here we go. I have to find out who Corn Planter was. And the citation next to the painting didn't really say much of anything except about the painter and the year and that this was Corn Planter. As I researched New York City, his name never came up. And so I kind of forgot about him. And then I came here, I went to the monument, I started looking up the battle, and whose name was there but Corn Planter. 8 years later, I found out who Corn Planter was. So Corn Planter was the Seneca war chief during the Revolutionary War. His name was also John Abiel III. His father, John Abiel II, was a Dutch fur trader based in Albany, New York. And it wasn't unusual that the Dutch fur traders had relationships with the tribal women. In this case, a Seneca woman. His grandfather, John Abiel, was also a Dutch fur trader and at one time the mayor of Albany. So he's born and he was raised by his mother in her clan, and his Seneca name, which I'm going to pop up here, but I'm not going to try to say it because it will really be just an offense to the Seneca nation. I would rather just put it here. As someone who can speak Seneca, maybe in the comments can sound it out phonetically for us so we'll know how to say it, means one who plants, and it became Corn Planter. And as time went by, John Abiel III, or one who plants, Corn Planter, became the war chief of the Seneca people. Now, the Revolutionary War gets very interesting. Now, I grew up about 90 miles north of here in a place called Binghamton, New York. And that, you might know, was once all Iroquois territory. And as I was growing up, I learned all about the 6 Iroquois nations. We visited a longhouse and learned all about them. But there were some things about them I didn't learn. And one of the things I didn't learn was that 4 of the 6 nations fought with Britain during the Revolutionary War, and 2 fought with America. The 4 who fought with Britain were the Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, and Onondaga, while the 2 who fought with the Americans were the Oneida and Tuscarora. Well, this became really interesting to me because you might know, if you have a copy of my book about Theodosia Burr, that I have a little section in that book about the Mohawk chief, Joseph Brant. Not only corn planter, but Brant was also here at the Battle of Wyoming. So this all started coming together to me in my mind, all of these connections coming together as I was reading about the battle here. And I don't know the battle in depth yet. I'm actually going out tomorrow with an expert in the battle who's going to walk me through it for a few hours and show me everything that happened and who was who and how it all came about. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to getting to be the client with a private guide, something I used to do a lot. I'm looking forward to being in the role of the person learning tomorrow. But what I do know is that on January 3rd, 1778, about 1100 Seneca, Mohawk, and British Rangers attacked about 300 Americans in Fort Wyoming. And there was a series of forts in the valley here, Fort Wyoming being one of them. Now, the British who were attacking these forts, I shouldn't even say they're British. They're fighting for the British. They're Americans. They're John Butler's Rangers, and he's American and his men are American. If you're familiar with Colonel Bannister Tarleton and Tarleton's Rangers, they also were American. And I'm just mentioning them here for a reason. I'll get to that in a while. So you might know about Bannister Tarleton. If you saw the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson, the bad guy, whose name was Tavington, played by Jason Isaacs, was based on Colonel Bannister Tarleton. So we get to July 3rd, 1778, 1,100 of these Rangers, allied with Mohawk and Seneca, attack the 300 men in the fort and kill them all. But they don't just kill them, they massacre them, deface their bodies, cut them up, various other things. And so this is known as the Wyoming Massacre Monument. Nearby is a rock called the Bloody Rock, where supposedly any of the men who survived that were brought there, and the Iroquois Queen Esther killed all of them, I think out of revenge for her husband and son's death at another time. Now, the expert who's taking me out tomorrow told me that's not true. It might not be true. I don't know. I'm putting it in here. So we have Corn Planter and Brant here at this massacre. And of course, they get blamed for it. The English are going to do this. They would blame the Hessians for atrocities. They would blame the tribal people for atrocities. So the English say, oh, no, it wasn't our guys. It was the Mohawk and the Seneca, those native savages that committed these atrocities. But both Brant and Corn Planter say, no, it was Butler's Rangers who did it. We restrained our men. It was Butler's Rangers. And I kind of am willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here, because I mentioned Tarleton's Rangers, and some of you might know there was a battle in the Carolinas called Waxhaws, where I think it was Virginia regiments surrendered to Tarleton, and he ordered his men to kill them all, and they murdered them. So knowing that Tarleton's Rangers did this, it's not a stretch for me to believe that it was Butler's Rangers who were responsible for the atrocities that were committed here. Well, this massacre, as well as some other attacks on the frontier forts going on at that time, caused General Washington to change his approach to the battle on the frontier. And he sent a general called Sullivan out here, who led something called Sullivan's Expedition. And what Sullivan did, and I'm going to have a video later about just Sullivan's expedition, and hopefully go to all of the sites where he stopped this summer. It's a big tour I'm planning. What Sullivan's guys did was they started not far from where I am here and traveled up the Susquehanna River into New York, up to Cherry Valley, destroying all of the Iroquois villages along the way, as Brant, Cornplanter, and Butler had also done that, destroying American forts along the way. So that was their retaliation, and I'll have another video about that. But today I wanted to give you some background on the monument here near my home, this Wyoming monument, the massacre that occurred, and the way it took me 8 years, can you believe it, to find out who this painting was in the New York Historical Society. And, don't say, Karen, why didn't you just go online to the New York Historical Society and find out what they have? Well, if you do that, I think you're not going to find out the full story about him. Quite a bit of his story is left out at the New York Historical Society website. But once you know his name is John Abiel III, you can find it all out. So that is my really neat story about how wherever you travel, there's Revolutionary War history. Well, along the Eastern Seaboard, of course. Wherever you travel, there's Revolutionary War history. You never know what you'll find, and you never know how it will connect back to something you already knew. And that is why, to me, the Revolutionary War is so incredibly fascinating. You can study it for life and never learn all of it. So I hope you liked my video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel for more of these about the Revolutionary War. I have a big video coming up about John Andre and Benedict Arnold and what went on in the town of Tapan in 1780 that you are going to love. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that, and share it with your friends who love American history. And until then, I'll see you next time.